Officer Marcus Shaw adjusted his badge in the rearview mirror of his patrol car. Rain pattered against the windshield, creating a rhythm that matched his tapping finger on the steering wheel. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, much like his heart toward certain residents of Westridge. Unit 437, we've got a disturbance at Pearson's Corner Store on Maple Avenue, the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. Copy that. On my way, Shaw responded, his deep voice betraying no emotion. He pulled away from the curb, his eyes narrowing as he drove through the east side of town. This was the third call this week from that neighborhood. Shaw had strong opinions about the people who lived there, opinions formed over 12 years on the force. He didn't consider himself prejudiced, he considered himself experienced. Just another day keeping the peace, he muttered to himself, unaware that today would shake the very foundation of everything he believed. Terrell Washington stood at the counter of Pearson's Corner Store, his wallet open as he counted out exact change for a carton of milk and some bread. At 28, Terrell was respected in the community, a high school basketball coach who mentored troubled teens. "Thanks, Mr. Pearson," Terrell said with a nod, gathering his groceries. The bell above the door jingled as Officer Shaw entered, his hand resting casually on his holster. His eyes immediately locked onto Terrell. "Everything okay here, Pearson?" Shaw asked the shopkeeper, deliberately ignoring Terrell. "All good, officer," Mr. Pearson replied nervously. As Terrell moved toward the exit, Shaw stepped directly in his path. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" "Home, sir." "Just bought some groceries," Terrell replied calmly, holding up his bag. "Let me see what's in there," Shaw demanded without cause. "Officer, I paid for everything," I said. "Let me see." Shaw's voice hardened as he grabbed the bag, roughly dumping its contents onto the counter. The milk carton burst open, splashing across Terrell's clean work shirt. "Looks like you made a mess," Shaw said with a smirk. "You planning to pay for that damage to store property?" Terrell's jaw tightened. Several customers watched in stunned silence, phones discreetly recording the injustice unfolding before them. "This isn't right," Terrell whispered, eyes steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. Westridge had always been a town divided by the railroad tracks. The west side boasted manicured lawns and renovated Victorian homes, while the east side struggled with underfunded schools and crumbling infrastructure. This wasn't new. For generations, families like the Washingtons had faced subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. 3 years ago, when the community center in East Westridge was shut down due to budget constraints, while the west side got a new aquatic facility, tensions had simmered. Last summer, when Jaden Powell, a teenager from the east side, was wrongfully arrested and held for 2 days before charges were dropped, those tensions nearly boiled over. The police force, predominantly white and largely recruited from the west side, operated with an unspoken bias. Complaints against officers like Shaw were filed but mysteriously disappeared. Town hall meetings grew heated, then unproductive, then poorly attended as East Side residents lost faith in the system. Yet beneath the division, a resistance was growing. Change was coming to Westridge, ready or not. Terrell's living room buzzed with determined energy. 10 neighbors gathered around his coffee table, which was covered with poster boards, markers, and printed flyers. "What happened yesterday wasn't just about me," Terrell said, pacing the worn carpet. "Shaw has been targeting our community for years. But this time we have evidence." Amara Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher, held up her phone. "My video already has 2,000 views. People are angry." "Anger isn't enough," said Pastor Dennis from First Community Church. "We need organization and discipline." Terrell nodded. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we gather at Town Square. Peaceful, but powerful. Our signs will tell our stories. Every person Shaw has harassed, every business he's intimidated." Layla Richards, a law student home for the summer, passed out Know Your Rights pamphlets. "Remember, stay calm no matter what. We're speaking truth, not looking for trouble." The doorbell rang. Terrell opened it to find Mr. Pearson from the corner store, looking nervous. "I, brought you some groceries to replace what got ruined," he said quietly. "And I want you to know, I'll be there tomorrow. I've been silent too long." Terrell smiled, clapping the older man on the shoulder. That's how change starts. One person finding their voice. As the meeting continued, none of them realized how significant tomorrow would become in Westridge's history. Marcus Shaw closed the door to his empty apartment and collapsed onto his sofa. The television droned in the background, another news segment about community unrest. He muted it. Growing up in rural poverty with a father who blamed their hardships on "those people taking our jobs," Shaw had absorbed prejudice like a sponge. The police academy had been his escape, his chance to prove himself. 12 years later, he'd become exactly what his training sergeant had molded, an officer who saw threats where there often were none. His shelves held commendations for arrests, mostly from East Westridge. Never mind that many cases were later dismissed. The numbers looked good. Shaw poured himself a drink, his mind replaying the incident with Washington. Something about the man's dignified restraint bothered him, though he wouldn't admit it. "Just doing my job," he muttered, trying to silence the small voice inside him that whispered otherwise. The summer sun beat down on town square as over 200 residents gathered, their signs raised high against the cloudless blue sky. Terrell stood at the front, leading chants with a megaphone. "What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now." From the police station across the square, Chief Barnes surveyed the growing crowd with concern. Shaw, Palmer, Rodriguez, front and center. "Keep this contained." Officer Shaw adjusted his riot gear, a mixture of anticipation and annoyance coursing through him. "Just troublemakers looking for attention," he muttered to Officer Palmer. As the protesters marched toward City Hall, their numbers swelled. Shop owners stepped outside, some joining in, others watching cautiously. News vans lined the streets, cameras capturing every moment. "Stay on the sidewalk," Shaw barked through a bullhorn when the crowd reached the police barricade. "Any step onto the street is obstruction." But as more people pressed forward, space became tight. A young man was accidentally pushed against the barricade. "Back up now," Shaw shouted, shoving the barrier forward. Confusion erupted. Someone stumbled. A water bottle flew through the air, splashing officer. Confusion erupted. Someone stumbled. A water bottle flew through the air, splashing Officer Palmer. "That's assault," Shaw yelled, pushing through the barricade toward Terrell, assuming he was the instigator. "You're under arrest." The crowd surged forward in protest. Officers drew tasers. Tensions escalated in seconds. Pastor Dennis stepped between Shaw and Terrell. "We are peaceful. Everyone stay calm." But Shaw was beyond listening. His hand moved to his holster as he grabbed Terrell's arm. Phones recorded everything as the situation teetered on the edge of violence. The day was about to take a dramatic turn that no one had anticipated. In that moment of escalating chaos, a small voice cut through the noise like a bell through fog. "Why are you so scared?" The crowd parted to reveal 6-year-old Zoe Williams, her bright yellow dress standing out against the sea of protesters. She had escaped her mother's grasp and now stood directly in front of Officer Shaw, her head tilted to one side, large brown eyes gazing up at him without fear. Shaw froze, his hand still on Terrell's arm. Something about those 4 words, so innocent, so perceptive, sliced through his armor. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice suddenly stripped of authority. "Why are you so scared?" Zoe repeated, pointing at his tense posture. "My daddy says people only get mean when they're scared." The square fell silent. Cameras focused on this unexpected confrontation, not between angry protesters and police, but between a towering officer and a tiny girl with beaded braids. Terrell gently moved his free arm, not to resist but to guide Zoe back toward her frantic mother who was pushing through the crowd. For 3 heartbeats, Shaw stood motionless, the child's question echoing in his mind. His fingers loosened their grip on Terrell's arm as something shifted inside him, the first crack in a wall built over decades. 3 days after the protest, Officer Marcus Shaw sat across from Chief Barnes, badge and gun placed on the desk between them. "The review board wants to see the body cam footage," Barnes said, studying Shaw's face. "Half the country has seen that little girl's question to you." Shaw nodded, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the chief's shoulder. "I've seen it too. Watched it 20 times. Outside the station, another protest had formed, smaller, but persistent. Signs demanded accountability. Terrell Washington had become a reluctant symbol of resistance, speaking on local news about systematic change. "Why am I here, Marcus?" Barnes asked quietly. "To suspend you or to hear something new?" Shaw's gaze finally met his superior's. "I need to talk to him." To Washington. Later that afternoon, at a community center in East Westridge, Shaw, dressed in civilian clothes, approached Terrell, who was coaching basketball. The kids scattered, recognizing the officer despite his plain clothes. "For minutes," Terrell said, arms crossed. "That's all you get." Shaw took a deep breath. "I came to say something I should have said years ago. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." It wasn't forgiveness, that would take much longer, but as Terrell cautiously nodded, it was something neither man had expected, a beginning.